Sehr geehrte Frau Staatsministerin, Professor Dr.
Dear State Minister, dear Professor Dr. Sinemus, dear Member of the European Parliament, Mr. Voss, dear Member of the German Bundestag Connemann, dear Mr. Gross, dear Mrs. Plöger, dear Mrs. Wettach, and dear ladies and gentlemen here in the room and also in front of your screens in Hesse and anywhere else. Dear guests, it's a pleasure and a great honor for me to welcome you here on behalf of Manfred Peetz, our Hessian Minister for Federal and European Affairs, Internationalization and Debureaucratization, to another hybrid edition of the Digital Leaders Roundtable here at the representation of Hesse to the European Union. It's great to see you all here. It's the 8th round of this very successful format. Innovation, growth, digitalization, these are the central hallmarks of Hesse as a business location. Digital infrastructures are the lifelines of this business side. The data centers are at the heart of this because it is in those centers that the rapidly growing volumes of data are stored, managed and processed. Well-developed data centers are therefore, as Minister Sinemus writes in her invitation, a real game changer. It is no wonder that the state of Hesse is already one of the most important and most ideal locations for future-proof centers in Europe and for small and medium enterprises in Europe. But let's also look to Brussels. Since 2019, the EU institutions have created a comprehensive legal framework for the digital sector. It was about averting risks of digital technologies. This is in the heart of these new laws. But this high regulative ambition goes sometimes against the innovative strength of this sector. Now, the hope is that this new Commission will really go towards this aim of more innovation and competitive advantages for the digital economy in this world. In the world. So we are looking forward to bringing together these two tensions, the regulatory framework and the room for innovation. And this is what we want to discuss today. I'm looking very much forward to a discussion here in this room. And now I want to give the floor to Professor Dr. Sinemus.
Ja, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, hier ganz.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, so we are here in the room and also digitally represented here today with this event, and I'm very happy to welcome you here in the representation of the state of Hesse to this 9th edition. And I think we have a very interesting panel here, and we will discuss what will be important in the future here in Europe. And this is the question, how can we how can we be able to store the data properly in this competitive framework and also put them at our disposal for our economy? In these times with a lot of turmoil, this is an increasingly important question. There were elections in the US, and the framework conditions in the US will, of course, change as of January, and we will have to face this fact. Now we have the potential new digitalization commissioner who just had a hearing at the European Commission, and normally, it is foreseen that the new Commission will be in place at the beginning of December. We will have new EU framework, and with the election, there will also be new decisions that will be taken. And also, there was the decision in Germany that there will be new elections at the beginning of next year. So we can say that this it is a very volatile political framework. And I think in Hesse, compared to that, we have quite some stability at the moment. And thus, we want to hold this discussion. I also had a digital summit that was organized 2 weeks ago. And I think the digital economy really means the future for us in Hesse, in Germany, and the EU, and also in on an international level. So these data centers, they are like a digital skyline of the continent, and Hesse has one of the biggest cores for the internet. It is one of the most attractive sites in Europe. And I would like to give a few numbers in order to illustrate this fact. In Hesse, we have a turnover of over 40 billion euros per year with digital economy. We have the digital economy is now stronger than the pharma sector and the financial sector. So if you look at the number of jobs, only in the data centers and around the data centers, there's 35,000 people working there. This is only for the data centers. If you look beyond there, it's even 30,000 more that are located in Hessen alone. So if now you want to look how this will develop in the future, then you can see that in Germany we will probably have an increase of more than 100 million euros in the next 10 years as a turnover. So data centers are the basis for digitalization and digital transformation, and we will continue developing this in order to also strengthen our positioning. And if we don't do this, we will not be able to develop the sector in Europe. It's important to create jobs and also to secure them. Innovation and invention can only take place if you can use the data properly. This is decisive for our future. So we need, in order to reach those goals, to strengthen our digital side in Hesse. But of course, we have the EU framework as well, which plays an important role. And then, of course, we also have the digital strategy in Hesse. But all this is decisive for the EU. So, and for that, we need to strengthen the data infrastructure, we need to strengthen the AI and quantum side location in Europe, and also use innovation and digitalization in order to have a flourishing economy and create jobs. It is goals that we also try to work towards in our ministry. And of course, we will look at the European Commission as well and what the future European Commissioner said. It's important to work together towards this goal. What we need is to have a good framework, and we have to look from Hesse to Germany and to the EU and into this EU competitive framework, and create a European digital strategy. And it's important that we make from innovation, we strengthen the innovation and thereby create jobs and secure jobs and take the people with us, because the dialogue is also important. We have to strengthen communication and dialogue, because I can see that we have. That's why I'm also traveling through Hesse like a circus would do and talk about this digital economy. And I can tell you there is when you talk to people, you can see that there is a lot of fears, but also curiosity. And we have to strengthen this curiosity, because we are a strong location for the digital economy and and we want to use this strength on a long term so that we can be able to continue on a long term to be innovative. And is this all topics we want to discuss tonight in this panel discussion? Thank you.
Ich bleibe hier oben, ich muss ja nicht wieder runtergehen, oder?
Dann komme ich. This is where I come into play, and I would like to warmly welcome you as well for this event. Digital leaders here today, both those present here as those watching from home. 400 pages of report, this Bible, as I would like to call it, for competitiveness. And one thing in particular was important: productivity development between Europe and the United States was compared. And do not look at digital, but if we look at digital as well, then we can see the reason for why we're lagging behind. The digital revolution actually was left out as such. Hessen has done what it had to do. Hessen did deal with it, but what can the rest of Europe do to make sure that digital will be a game changer, so to say? If you wonder, yes, thank you for talking into the microphone. So, for all those who are watching from home behind their desk, you may send in questions, streamline at lvh-brussels.de, brussels-hessen.de. And now I would like all those who are discussing with us today to come to the panel so that we may start discussion.
So, ich freue mich, aus dem Europäischen Parlament zu uns gekommen.
Axel Voss from the European Parliament, you have been here.
Sie sind vor allem rechtspolitischer Sprecher.
You have been here quite often. You are an artificial intelligence expert from your group, and an expert also for digital as such, if we might say so. On my left side, I'm happy to have from the German Bundestag, Gitta Connemann. You are also the president of the Mittelstands und Wirtschaftsunion, in charge of small and medium-sized enterprises. And then Kilian Gross from the AI Office of the European Commission. We use the same abbreviation. KI in German is AI in English. And even though it does not sound as smooth, Iris Plöger, member of the Executive Board of the Federation of German Industries, BDI, online. Thank you very much for inviting me today. Mrs. Connemann, I have seen that you nodded your head when fears were mentioned, fears in the small and medium-sized enterprises. So, what is the atmosphere within SMEs at the moment when we look at digital regulation, at artificial intelligence, competition on a worldwide level, moving fast? What are the trends? At the moment, it's really a roller coaster, I would say. There's a huge gap. Basically, companies in Germany know whether they are small or big companies. And most of our companies in Germany are small. 3.3 million companies are represented by over 90% by small and medium-sized companies that are smart and innovative and creative. Otherwise, they would not have been able to exist in these difficult framework conditions within European and worldwide competition. And those companies know how important digitalization is. Of course, that is almost natural by now. But they also know how important artificial intelligence is. 75 to 80% say they need it, but only about 15% are living it in reality. And this shows that there's a huge gap between knowing and putting it into practice. And this has also to do with fears. And this is why I enthusiastically nodded when Mrs. Sinemus mentioned those emotions and feelings out there, because it is about more than just hard facts. We are not just dealing with questions such as what is our infrastructure or how digital must a startup be. It's more about emotionally taking citizens and companies on board, taking them with us. And when we talk to them, 2 or 3 fears come up as well. They're talking about some problems, about fears such as missing or a lack of access to data, which makes open source such an important topic, and then lack of knowledge. And this is why we have to talk about it, talk about how can we make sure that digital education is more embedded already in kindergartens and schools. This is a topic for the Länder, for the regions actually. And then thirdly, the fear of how this will change my business model. There are so many open questions. We have a less stable planning situation. It's more difficult to plan, and there's no consultants or no accompanying the companies from a state level. Artificial intelligence strategies or digital strategies in the past years have not really been developed as fast as they would have been needed. And this is why we definitely have to take people with us emotionally. And we have to make sure that deficiencies are tackled. An important example is the only digital minister of Germany. This is an extremely wonderful example, showing also that Hessen has seen what needs to be done. And I think that after the elections of the Bundestag in Germany, we also look forward to having a digital structure on a federal level, whether that be a ministry or another type of structure. One thing is certain, we must never lose track and lose sight of linking this to the European Union. At this moment, we cannot do anything anymore on a standalone level as a country, especially in the area of digital. That would be naive. In the end, only a digital Europe can also be a successful Europe, and only a European digital Germany will be a digitally successful Germany. Thank you very much. You mentioned there's a lack of strategy. Of course, we do have an objective from Brussels for 2030. 90% of small and medium-sized enterprises should be equipped with skills to make good use of artificial intelligence, and this is almost not reachable. It is something that we would say for Germany that's just almost impossible. And the fact that regulation is only now coming, that it can only now be implemented towards and in Germany. I mean, this is why it is too late. If you think that digitization and artificial intelligence is a threat and not a possibility, a chance, and if you are not doing this with passion, you will not be able to make the spark jump over to others. Thank you. This actually has already led us to artificial intelligence. Looking at small and medium-sized enterprises, I would like also to talk about big companies with Mrs. Plöger. Mrs. Plöger, are you listening to us? So we have a quite dramatic picture from the small and medium-sized enterprises. What about you with the look to digitization? Is there optimism, or are the fears the same? Mrs. Wettach Thank you very much. I also talk for small and medium-sized enterprises and for the companies on the same level. We actually have 98% of companies from small and medium-sized enterprises in our union. And of course, the bigger ones sometimes have easier situations, easier framework conditions, but Germany is mainly made up of small and medium-sized enterprises, as we have it in the so-called KMU definition, the small and medium-sized enterprise definition. There are many who have come far in digitalization, but those that Mrs. Connemann mentioned that are having a hard time exist as well. And when later on we will talk about the steps, the single stepping stones and elements we will need. I'm not quite sure whether regulation is actually meant in a way to enable small and medium-sized companies or whether it could also be seen as an obstacle. During the last mandate of the European Commission, there was a lot of regulation, the Data AI Act, Digital Markets Act, etc. So there is a lot, and these have to be implemented in the single member states. For us, what is important is that this should happen in a harmonized way all over Europe. Europe is not above us. In the past, we have done this sometimes, that we have looked too late towards European processes or contributed too late, and the national discussions with national politicians, then, well, it always seems like this is coming from top down, and it's like like a heavy strike. But this is not always the case. What we see in the United States is that they're also trying to reduce regulation, and what we have to do is that we have to see how can we be efficient with the existing framework in a way that it can be an empowerment for companies and not be an obstacle. This means that we should avoid going double. The AI Act and the Medical Devices Act are examples where there are overlaps, and this we should avoid. And then also the data regulation, data protection regulation is the same. So we have to see that these are opportunities and not threats. Europe is thus not a strike coming from a top. There is a series, this is a series of events which is really also co-created by you. And at this point, I would like to hand over to you, Mr. Gross, from the AI Office of the European Commission. You have been involved very deeply with the AI Act, and now you are working in the AI Office in the European Commission. You're also dealing with its implementation. Can you say something to alleviate the fears of the companies? Yes, of course. And I also have to relativize that. The European Commission has done a lot, of course. CHIPS Act, Artificial Intelligence Act, these are pieces of legislation for enabling where parts of microchips in Europe should be, or the microchips production in Europe should be strengthened. And we have for the first time a program with 8 billion euros where we also financing digitization, which is always important for small and medium-sized enterprise. Our idea was always to create a framework, but not to create no AI, but the AI Act is a single market act. It's not a ban. It's actually a law to create a framework, a market for AI. It is just one legislative piece, and that's it. Several countries have thought about and are still thinking about whether they should regulate. But our clear message is no. The only thing that has to happen also in Germany is that you have to create who is in charge and what penalties are to be paid. But it's not about creating more regulation. When we have a market and when AI is tested and certified, then like any car and medical product, as was mentioned, can be used in 27 member states without limitations, without further checks, etc. This is the main message of the AI law. Secondly, it's a product law, and in Europe we have a lot of experience with good products and making these products also safe, and this is why we are hopeful, optimistic. We think that we will not just have AI, but transparent and good AI that is not discriminative, that has high standards and can be used in many different areas like cars or medical products, drones, etc. And we think that this should also give us a competitive edge because, for example, we have seen it with medical products. We have world-class products, and this is one of our advantages. And thirdly, we also hope that we will create a market because we can see that there is, if you look at the high-risk areas, a lot of market. Administration is not risk-affine, and in our heads, AI are actually something where we just see negative examples such as wrong evaluations, etc. And this would lead to AI, to technology that is discriminating. We have examples of these in Germany, but we should now make sure that once we have certified AI, public administration should be using it.
Great, yes. Very interesting what you just said. So we regulate so that we can have a competitive advantage. So the idea is not to put limits to the economy, but to create a bit competitive advantage. So, well, the EU digital policy can be seen as a strategic failure. This goes a bit against what we just said. Could you tell us a bit about it? Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you also for your work in Brussels and in your region. So there is hope. Well, concerning your question, 2020 we had the digital decade, they called it. I believe it was great ideas, but if they are not implemented, it doesn't help, of course. Then for 5 years we concentrated on single problems, regulated, but making one law after the other doesn't mean you have a strategy. So now we do more and what I want to say with this, so it was lacking some kind of framework, some kind of underlying structure. It wouldn't be enough to just advance. So what we need is to put together the strength on a European level, like some kind of pooling of strength, because alone we cannot manage. I think you really have to bundle, to pool these different strengths we have. So we need European projects so that we have really still the chance to be leading at some point. And if we want to achieve this, to be leading in some sectors, then we have to focus on certain things. So from a strategic point of view, it will not help if now Bavaria compares itself to Baden-Württemberg or to North Rhine-Westphalia, or Germany compete with France, then that will not help. What we do need is a priority, or several priorities maybe, but something which will help us to get a foot in the door and say, this is where we are leading. So what could it be? It could be the autonomous driving. Maybe that's a bit too late for that, but let's say green tech, smart farming, for example, or maybe, but this would have to be discussed, human robots. This might be something that, might be a chance, an opportunity. China is doing something in this regard, but this might be something which would be a possibility, but we would have to be leading in this. And then maybe we have to, for example, digitize, instead of, for example, digitize reporting, because does that really bring us economic success? I don't know. So I really think you have to concentrate on something. And then, of course, you have to have the underlying conditions to achieve this infrastructure, all the things, everything that has to do with connectivity. And we need, of course, a lot of money for it. and you have to organize it. And then, of course, cybersecurity. I'm sure there is other preconditions, but I think these three things are really the basis in order to be able to build up something. And then you have to concentrate on these things. Also in the universities, we are good at developing ideas, but we don't scale them enough. We don't make a business model out of it. And this is what in the end plays in favor of other actors. Then one thing I would like to say, without wanting to go against what you said, but one thing that is difficult is the position of national politicians, because at the moment they are limiting itself to looking at their own territory instead of looking more at Europe as a big player and thinking how this could be used. And this, of course, acts as some kind of break to this endeavor. Because it's a bit like in Germany. We have the different federal states that do different things. It might be successful in some cases, but in the end, generally speaking, it is not enough. And this is what I mean by that. So on the one hand, you can develop good ideas, you can be strategic but if you don't implement them, then it doesn't help. And then on the other hand, this legislation is not a strategy. So I personally think at the end, at the moment, it is really about surviving digitally, and this we have to get better at that. So it's about surviving digitally. When you hear that, what do you think? Well, at the end of the day, that means that digitalization has to be organized in a way that we can have a prosperous economy and create jobs and go our European way. So it is correct to do this, but we have to do it. So we have to talk about it as well. And we also have to lead the way in that regard. And as a Hessen Minister for Digital Strategy, we have decided on the resources. We have a digital agenda for the future, and we haven't only developed it, we have implemented it. We have put 100 million euros in artificial intelligence in the last mandate, creating infrastructure, supporting small and medium enterprises, things that SMEs can use also for free in order to calculate the things. We have our own funding program as well, and we have 153 companies that have been funded within this program. And now we have to do the next step. We have to scale up. And in Germany, we do have more capital in order to scale up indeed. And then the third thing we did is the following. We said we want to go our own way, and we said we want to have responsible AI. This is why we created this digital strategy, and we tried to develop different topics that are important for Europe. So, for example, to have to create a structure of trustees, of digital trustees, that allows the data to be used responsibly. And then, Mr. Voss, we also created a quality and testing hub. So it's some kind of possibility for certification as well. And this quality and testing hub has exactly the aim that was described earlier, meaning to enable qualitative AI in Europe, because of course we have to be competitive in a market, and this is a possibility to be competitive. This is why we have to enable the possibilities of regulation and also of the technical aspects. So all this has to be used in a positive way, that's why I would hope that if you talk about regulation, it's not only all negative, it really can also be used as an opportunity. So we talked about what's possible as well. You said all the things that you make possible as a state. But now we're in Brussels, so that's why I want to ask you the question: what would be your wish for for the coming 5 years? We are at the beginning of a mandate. The new commission is supposed to take effect beginning of December. So what would be your wish? What would help the economy, really? So what I would wish would be to really implement and make this what the president said more concrete. So competitiveness for Europe, and I represent the federal state of Germany, and I can say that we don't have the best numbers. We are very much lagging behind, and we are still losing a lot in Europe. And that's why I think this title that was used really has to be implemented. And now we have a very good economical program to also reduce bureaucracy. And this was also part of all the mission letters of the commissioners to say what they had to do in this regard. And this will also make things more acceptable in Europe. Acceptance is key. So we have to have more trust again, because each regulation also means there is some kind of lack of trust. Maybe it's also about protecting, but it also might make things less attractive. So make the EU less attractive instead of more attractive. And also about German SMEs, for example, this morning I had a meeting with different representatives of the SMEs, and they see Europe as a big opportunity, as a big leading factor for them. But the problem is that there is this overload. And so there's the regulation for the supply chain, and I'm very happy that the EPP now also took some steps in this direction for the supply chain, but there is also many obligations still. And I think that what we need is to have a good structured cooperation and also think as a unity. And that brings me back to data protection law. And that's why I was also listening to what you were saying, and I was very interested because in Germany, for example, we also want to have a product law for AI. We want to have a definition in order to have something good at the end. But with this law, we don't want to prevent things. But when we talk, when I talk with people in Germany, then this is the impression I get. That is the problem. And so when we look at now implementing things, then, well, you have this responsible person for data protection officer. If you look at how this worked out, it is not very helpful, although data protection is so important. When you look at what was done with this regulation in Germany, this is just everything but ideal. It just doesn't make sense. And the idea that this was actually supposed to protect people kind of was lost. And then if now also artificial intelligence should use for it, well, oh my God. So, of course, then this also you ask the question, why all these things? So I'm sure there would be better solutions as well. What would have been better? Well, at least certainly not the federal network agency, the German Netzagentur. So I would think we need some kind of headquarter, indeed, whatever you want to call it, the digital ministry in the new mandate, or whatever you want to call it, but something where everything comes together. So we need this pooling of resources so that the digitization can be implemented correctly and is really something where the focus is on. that really becomes a priority, so that we can use the opportunities and not only look at the risks. So that Germany can again participate in this competition. But one thing we have to do in Germany, maybe you can make saying that, for example, if you make a proposal, then we say, yeah, we now have to implement it. The idea is that what we get from the EU, we have to leave it as it is, and because things are clear, and I think it's important that we leave it as it is. And the second point I want to make is also this federal system. We shouldn't change things here. It's of course good to have strong federal state, but we have come to a situation where you're blocking each other, and this is really a problem in Germany. So we have to also look at the responsibilities, and so if we don't do that, we will not be able to continue developing, and we have to use the strength of, for example, a state of Hessen, which is leading the way in digitalization, and we need to have a competitive model where the strongest player can pull the others as well. This is fascinating, but that means that you also need to be able to change things on a federal level. So that without mentioning developing infrastructure, and also without talking about an ecosystem, which I already mentioned earlier. But we have certain things that would be dealt with more efficiently on a federal level. But the solutions are on the table, we just need to implement them.
Thank you. You mentioned a lot also that is actually looking towards Berlin, also the 16 data protection responsibles. Well, this is not the fault of Brussels, yes, but however, harmonization could be done. Prior to reacting to this, I would like to first come to Mrs. Plöger and ask you, what would you like to see for the next 5 years from Brussels? A lot was already mentioned. Definitely, the overarching digital strategy is something. Mrs. Connemann mentioned it. And we do indeed want competition of different systems. In the past, we have sometimes made the error that we wanted to unite the entire Europe. If we look at Gaia X, for example, we lost such a lot of time. And I do think that we do not have this time anymore to look how to create a choreography of things for the next years. But sometimes we need to accept and to have the courage of letting some regions take the lead in certain projects, but we cannot always think that this will be immediately done and also valid for all member states. Let's take, for example, the example which is the industrial basis in Germany. This is our example, and because we do have a know-how that few countries in Europe can boost such a big proportion of the pill as well. We do also have the experience with data centers, because we have always focused on that. Data access was mentioned as one of the obstacles. Other countries might be better in other areas. Some might even be front runners in AI and may already have come closer to the big models. So in Europe, I think so far we still have commitment that companies want to be in Europe. We do have a good basis of skilled workers in Europe, and this is one of the reasons why so many have chosen to stay in Europe. However, at the same time, we also have these obstacles, and I do see that a little bit like a mosaic that might also come together in a natural way without always being negative. We have done a lot in these past years together with cloud networks. AI computing centers are an important topic here, because regulation needs also be founded on an infrastructure, on adequate infrastructure. And the state has an important role in digitization. It's not just about acceptance, but it's also about moving forward. We are not a pioneer in Germany as far as digitization in administration is concerned. And this is why it's important that cloud networks, for example, well, this is why it has been so difficult, because in these past years, the state has not been a market for us. If we look towards the United States or China, we see that many business models have grown so quickly because the state was a provider, was a buyer, was a market. And this is why, next to the promotion of the economy, we also need a common understanding that states play a big role. And regulation, well, I think regulation has also be accompanied by supervision and by implementation. If I, as a legislator, do something, I have to make sure that there are supervisory structures that can deal with that. This is why we see, for example, with high interest, we follow what the AI office is doing. It's not about control. It's more about empowering companies to be able to use regulation. And to do that, we need a lot of men and women power in this area. And this is a central topic that also needs to be brought down to the single member states. The Federal Network Agency, of course, was maybe the most or the best, most adapted at that moment. However, from the economy, point of view of the economy, what is important is that it's in one hand. Whether it's interesting to develop an agency, that's one thing. But as an economy, we need the same interlocutors in Brussels, not some interlocutors for the Data Act and others for other pieces of legislation. We need to know that this is done harmoniously by one interlocutor or one agency. Okay, so on the one hand, there is enthusiasm that these exist, but on the other hand, we also heard that there is a huge expectation, not just in Germany, but also other member states, that the next Commission will be less bureaucratized, less red tape. We know that this is difficult. What do you do, or how do you see these expectations? You also said it is not just that regulation is done by passion, but it does have sense, it does make sense. Is there a risk that expectations are too big? Expectations towards reduction of red tape. Thank you very much also for the other contributions. If you look at the mission letter of the President, you will see also with the guidelines, and also if you look at the organigram of the European Commission with the Vice President and Commissioner for simplification and the reduction of red tape is in any mission right now. We do think that the topic is centralized. However, of course, it's always difficult to be debureaucratized. We know that. The question was, well, or the message is received, and we want to work on this and also move it forward. And it was already mentioned that we also need to be more competitive. We need to have a stable growth and stable employment. This is not simple. The geopolitical situation was mentioned for Germany, but for the world as such, this will not make things easier, or for Europe. At the European Commission, there are plans and there are things that we have done in the past, things that we want to continue to design. The Commissioner for Digital Affairs has also mentioned it yesterday in front of the European Parliament. She mentioned quantum, she mentioned data spaces, she mentioned supercomputers, AI. So the central words, buzzwords are mentioned. In the area of AI, there is a lot that has been done. AI factories at the opening speech of the European Commission President. It was mentioned the first 5 call applications have been received. Germany is part of it. The factories are those, for those who do not know, factories should bring together supercomputers. They should be empowered to be AI capable. They are upskilled and reskilled. Or employees are upskilled and reskilled, and there should be concrete AI hubs. This should be done every 4 months with further applications. We think this is very important. Generative AI for EU was in January with the idea to go into vertical sectors, which is a point that Draghi also mentioned. And there will be an applied AI strategy in order to make sure to reflect on how we will reach a future-proof strategy for my area. But if we look at this in a nutshell, one sentence, in comparison, and OECD also does that, we can see that what the Europeans are doing, the European member states and the European Union as such, on a public level, that is not bad. There's a lot on a public level that is happening. Many things are going well, universities, startup skills, etc. What is difficult is private capital. There is no comparable private capital like in the United States, and this makes it very difficult for us to be competing, to be competitors, and the volumes of funding of money that are moved around in the United States are just huge. If we look at capitalization, 500 million in Europe, that's amazing. In the United States, you have 10 to 15 billions. This is just to show you the differences. And it is important that the private economy will be included in order to be active. And we do have initiatives such as the Data Hub Europe. I'm totally grateful for it. We need to bring verticals together, the Deutsche Bahn, Schwarz Group and others. They need to bring together the forces because we do not have a digital giant in Europe like Microsoft or others, to mention just one. Nothing against Microsoft. Of course, they're also running on our computers. However, the verticals are the ones we need to work with. We have to be strong. And this is the European Commission also, what the European Commission also wants in chemicals and robotics or others. In the automotive sector, in many other areas, the verticals have also resources to invest capital and to create industrial added value. This is an important step. And this turnaround, this turnover, the digitization coming into the industry and to having these industry data, this is what it's all about. Private data, well, that's behind. Data protection, etc. was also mentioned. Now we're talking about industrial data, and Europe needs to be a forerunner. And this includes that we need to create the conditions, but also have private initiatives. Not the state alone can do it. Private initiatives will have to be promoted, will have to be brought together, but also carried forward. Mr. Voss, during the hearing of the future Commissioner for Digital Affairs, you were present. Are you an optimist now after hearing all of this, what was said today? Are you happy with plans that are there now on the tables? The analysis is quite strong. Are you positive that there will be a dynamic in Europe? First of all, I'm an optimist, so to say, because the hearing yesterday was the best that I've ever seen. There were 5 or 6 that I saw, so I think it's a very good hearing. And it was ambitious. You have the impression that this new narrative will also be looking at competitiveness and support for the economy, etc. And this is why I'm actually relieved. Quality, well, will we have to do everything that's expected here or dress here, set up here? I'm not sure. However, we do have to do more. I do not think everything that was said will already be enough, but it will be better than before. And I think the Commissioner will be working well. However, we need to be more ambitious. And this step will be a difficult one. I believe that which we have done in the past 5 years, or what he said or tried to initiate, is exactly what Draghi is now saying. You have the impression that now it's only real when Draghi is saying it. And this is quite frustrating because it gives you the impression or in actual fact, the impression was already there before. The feeling was already there before. Also the feeling that things are stagnating and are too complicated, too fixed or focused on risk. So we also need courage to take risks because we lag that far behind. And where exactly? In what areas? If you say this is not ambitious enough, where exactly? Well, we do not have to take on any risk or avoid any risk that has been seen in the AI Act. We do not have to resolve it immediately. Sometimes we can also say, okay, let's be positive and not regulate everything again into detail. I would like to say, well, let alone the atmosphere in the past 5 years have always come up against the same walls and obstacles. For example, in the modernization of the data protection regulation, this DG Just and the European Commission is still thinking that it's our golden standard in the world and we have to keep it. We must not touch it. However, the way we are now using it was never the intention. Now every single membership has its own interpretation, and this is something that was never intended that way. The GDPR Act, if I look at DG Justice, there is no need that is actually seen. And then we have the Data Protection Board, which is looking at details that are not practicable at all. But this is not what we wanted or needed. And this is why we have to deal more with it. If we look at the principles, sorry if I'm going into so much detail, however, the principles, we do have technology like AI there, but we do not need the data just for one purpose. These data are cancelled, and this is sometimes a loss of data, and data minimization can be the wrong way to go because more data would be so much more helpful. And these are things where we have to say, well, this is not possible. And this also was mentioned today. If only data protectors are let into the room, and of course they will be working at 150%, nothing will happen anymore. Industry data will be defined in a way where, well, every possible piece of data will be linked to a person and nothing will be usable anymore. This is really highly critical what's happening there, and I think we should be a little bit more open towards risks to say, well, is indeed every single piece of data from a machine, can it be traced back to a person? Let's not look at that. We're so much lagging behind that we have to open this bag. And if there should be a problem, or should there be a problem one day, then we will look at it. But doing this already before even knowing if the risk exists, that's not the right way to go.
Now we unfortunately don't have anyone from DG Just here, but anyway, you mentioned the US earlier. I would be interested to know what do you think about relation between the US and the EU? Because we heard this morning that the future president of the US, Donald Trump, hired Elon Musk in his future government, so that could create some competition between the two regions separated by the Atlantic Ocean. So what do you see in your party? Because you created a lot of things in Hessen. You have this digital ministry, and if we have a government, for example, that after the elections will be led by the CDU or other parties, do you think there will be a digital ministry? Of course, it's not me deciding who will be deciding, but I can say that even in Hessen, before we had this ministry, it was working well, and I think we can act as an example for the federal state. If in the federal state they do this, this will also be used as an example for other federal state, because if you have one contact point for everything that has to do with digitalization, then it's easier. It accelerates things, and I think it would be good for everyone in Germany to have this one-stop agency, this one-stop shop. And that's why I do think it is correct and necessary to have a ministry for digitalization. And you see here also, you have some of the representatives here who think the same, to have such a headquarter. But then, of course, there's always the question, how many ministries do we want? But I don't want to talk about this. I just want to say we need to have one place where everything is coordinated in order to be able to think vertically and horizontally. And I think that the union has understood that also in order to make advance this digitalization future-proof. And one of the main media said the union will create a ministry for digitalization, apparently. So how will this be implemented after elections? I don't know. This is not my choice, but I hope that the citizens whose choice it will be will see that this is the way to follow. And I think that this will allow things to be developed much faster. Well, thank you very much. But looking at the time, I would now like to open the discussion with the floor here. So we have a microphone. If you have a question or a remark, please do tell your name and tell us who this question is. For who this? Yes, my name is from the SME agency from Belgium. Thank you for your presentations. I would like to make it sure. We have the topic gold plating. This was not mentioned now, but it was also about that in some way. So my question is to Mr. Go, in this in the GDPR and in the AI Act, do you see some kind of gold plating in Germany in the sense that European standards are overdone? If yes, why? And what would be the proposals to simplify it? I can only talk about the AI Act because the GDPR has been implemented for a long time. And for the AI Act, we haven't seen the implementation yet. But I can say that that from Germany, we got the signals that they want to have such an authority. And this is correct and necessary because they have to also check the certified authorities. And of course, you have the question of fines. We are in contact, of course, with the colleagues. Of course, I'm not the one who decides in Berlin, but I can only say what we hear. But we haven't had any indications that would lead us to think that the federal state in Germany wants to go much further. But anyway, I can only say what I heard. I haven't seen an official text yet, but from what I hear from informal discussions, this seems to be the case. Of course, things are still under discussion. But this is what we heard so far. Concerning simplification, the Commission has a lot of ambition here. And of course, we have a lot of questions about what we still want to do. Now they also ask a lot what we should not do anymore, or what we should leave apart. And so it goes in this direction. And I think there will a lot of things still be happening. The Commission has taken this on as a focus, and I'm sure there will be a lot of simplification still happening. Just one thing I would like to add with this future regulation authority, we have of course taken gotten in touch immediately, and we said we like to act as a best practice example. And I think it's really important to look at the right approach. I cannot every time differentiate on a legal basis, but I have to ask the companies, if you want to implement this act, how can you use these things? Like, for example, in terms of project management, if I anyway have data that has already been secured under the GDPR, then I have to make sure I don't need another project management for the AI Act as well. And so we need a concrete approach, and I offered also my help in this, and we will, in cooperation with this authority, try to implement this AI Act in an enabling way, in an integrative way. There is already good approaches that have been developed by certain startups as well. For example, if you have these requirements, these legislative requirements, then you can look at these things with a common systemic approach. And I think this can also help. One last question. Yeah, Benjamin Latva is my name from the Minus IT group. We are a real European company with a seat in France, Spain, and Germany, in Bad Homburg in Germany. This is our link to Hess. And I would like to know, the following you talked about strengthening the strength and also think more globally. This is important because what we see. But now I lost my thought. But what I wanted to say, I was at the digital summit with you that you organized, Mrs. Sinemus, and we heard that there is, that we have this company that has 162 passengers every day, 100,000 of parcels every day, and the digitalization is increasing, and they need an integrator, of course, of these different technologies that also brings all the developers and SMEs together. And this is something that this company called Amadeus does, and they need 1 billion euros for developing this software per year. And this is, a good example of things that have to be done. So that's why I would like to also call you again to continue strengthening these strengths, as you said. And then we have the e-identity, KI, data, and everything. And all this is pulled together. And in our sector, tourism sector, traveling sector, there is a lot of success models that can be looked at. Thank you. Yes, there's another question here. Margarete Hutzki from the Zentralverband des Deutschen Handwerks. I talked about many companies that use AI as well. It's many companies from this Chamber of Trade, and I have the impression that when you look at the Draghi report, they focus a lot on this scale-ups and unicorns, if you want. But what we would need for the trades is to have this digital competency so that this can be developed. But I don't see this approach, and I would like to see the Parliament and the Commission to continue pushing these basic skills, and not only this advanced digital skills that a lot is talked about. We need this basic skills, and we need corresponding funding for that, because, for example, in this regard, there's a lot of funding missing. I would like to listen to this, and this is also what we've done. We have a cooperation with the Chamber of Trade, and we have different funding programs for this. And one outcome of developing the skills in trade, in the craft sector, is that the chambers now have digital advisors working for them, and that go into the companies to advise them. And that's why I think it could also be something that could be done more on a European level to continue developing the skills also in the trade sector together with and to continue developing projects together with the trades, so that in order to develop exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning this, because the Chamber of Trade is a very German thing indeed, Zentralverband des Deutschen Handwerks, although you are Austrian, aren't you? But we talked with your general secretary yesterday, and in the end, it's always about people being at some worker or an employer, and we always have to look at how we can continue developing skills and what is missing in this area. And that brings me back to the topic of education, is the topic of digital education. This is not developed enough in Germany. in schools, as of the 8th or 9th grade, this kind of starts. Maybe in Hessen it's different, but this is the problem, Kristina. If we have such different situations in Germany, and now I'm talking only about Germany, then it really depends on where you go to school and whether then you are educated about media and the digital economy or not. So this is a problem, and this is also a problem for growth in Germany, because we can only be future-proof thanks to innovation, creativity, and what's in our heads. But of course, these heads have to be educated. And this is why this also has to be done in collaboration with the schools, also the schools that teach professions. And this is not developed enough, and it's a real problem for our country. So you're absolutely right in this regard. The second question is the implementation. How can we implement things? That's why I talked about fears earlier. How can we implement this in the companies as well? Because, of course, we have good examples in companies. I have always one company in my head when I think about this, like for example, a carpenter that does these things, but the others might not be at this level. So, indeed, of course, this always requires funds, money, but also structures, like Kristina, Sinemus just mentioned them, like, for example, having these advisors in the Chamber of Trades, examples like that, so that this can be anchored further. But of course, we need to have a different understanding of what is digital in Germany, other than something that goes beyond just, for example, TikTok. And I'm always fascinated by the Finnish model, for example, where you have a very low threshold, like in a playful manner. This is something I would like to see in Germany as well. And in the big coalition, there was funding programs, but unfortunately, those were discontinued on a federal level. So in the end, we need different kinds of measures, structural measures, measures for this educative measures, and also funding.
I would like to underline what you just said, dear Gitta. The topic of education, of course, needs to be brought into the digital world, and it needs to be broadened in its definition, because, and this is also in favor of a education structure on a federal level. In Hessen, together with the cultural ministry, we have thought about what we can do in order to make sure that education is moved forward, and together with many others, and also drinking some bottles of red wine, we're thinking, okay, how can we do this? We should bring into a horizontal project based subject matter called digital worlds, and this should be a problem solving focus, and it should, well, we actually did a pilot project in some classes in the last legislative period, and it's now brought into classes 5 to 7, and it does help to create this user-oriented approach, how to program a robot, for example, that can do the grass in my garden without touching the flowers. Things like these have been envisaged and have been created, or creating a digital track moving through schools and enabling pupils to build their own robot. And these things can happen if we do it on a federal level. Sit together, think on how to do it, and then implement it, possibly bringing it from the federal level to the regional level. Because if we are not able to do this in harmonized steps, then at the end of the day there will be problems, and we have to start as fast as possible. Do we have more time for a question? Robert Wagner from the Federal Office in Germany, dealing with these questions. I'm in charge of AI and big data, and I found this really interesting. There's truth in wine, so you mentioned the wine bottles. Well, education is one thing. There was rhetorics mentioned, certification, we have startups that have made very interesting and creative things. They do not look at the European AI Act. They rather dealt with their own development, machine vision development, or other methods that are like buzzwords, methods also to recognize people, for example. If we create regulation, how are you supervising that? If you have a startup from Hessen that wants to access the market, has possibly already access to the market, what does it mean for us as the European Economic Area to bring life into this space? I mean, regulatory or certification, regulatory speaking, or from the point of view of certification, do you have experience there? What do you do in practical terms, and how can you help on a state level to create access to the state and protect it possibly also? We do it in 3 ways. First of all, we have, after the first phase of financing, where we have just financed, but also added private money. In the second phase, we have created an investor meeting, Innovation Meets Finance, where these 150 startups that want to scale up can meet potential investors. This was the second thing we did. And then we have created this innovation lab in order to provide equipment. We invested in live language models as well. And now what we want to do is to make this available to startups in real life, so they can calculate in a protected space, but we do not give them money, but we provide the infrastructure, the calculation infrastructure. That's a new way of funding. Thirdly, there's the AI Quality and Testing Hub, which is made in a way that together with the SME Competence Center, it can also offer consultants to the startup community, which should allow for a smooth implementation for this target group. It's a topic that is very important to us. Regulation, how can we do it in a way that it's not a burden and a hurdle to startups and small and medium-sized enterprises? Minister of Hessen mentioned the network of 200 digital innovation hubs, which should also be the target for SME. A high-risk SME, for example, will be transferred to center boxes who are who are helping to create or adhere to the risk elements. But we also want to deal with or make available to them digital tools, other platforms, and other elements that they can use. We want to give them access to finance and to knowledge that might be available in other areas. And this is a little bit what we see as an ecosystem of support. And we also want a very simple first offer in order that they can approach the hub, and every single hub should be specialized. In a big country like Germany, we might need more. I think this is the best approach. And we also look at skills, of course. That's high on our agenda. There is one article on AI literacy, and this is also the one that is most used or read. Reskill, upskill is also important, but it's also about digital competences. Thank you very much. Is there another question in the room? Thank you. Christian von Stamm. I am from Denmark. I hope that you will understand my German. I'm cybersecurity policy lead in Hammer Strategy, and I work with big high-tech companies from Europe and the United States. Yesterday I was in the European Parliament, and I listened to the hearing that was already mentioned several times today. One thing that I found was missing is that she's now both Commissioner and Executive Vice President for Tech Sovereignty, which is not a new term. However, it is so high on the political agenda, and that is new. And this is why I would like to know from Axel Voss and the other panel speakers, what does this mean for Europe? How should we, what should the approach in digital look like so that it can support this? Thank you very much for your question. You think that digital was actually missing in the title of Mrs. Wilken. Is that what you're saying? What do you think about this after the hearing? And how can you make sure that it will be implemented on such a high level? Well, the names are, this could be discussed indeed. They are, it's not always clear whether they have been well chosen, but maybe they should only be indicative of an objective of which I'd say, okay, tax sovereignty is certainly something nice, but we would need more competitiveness. So if that is included in the title, okay. But I'm not always sure whether this is then not falling short. Maybe there should be more digital terms in the title. That's always something where I'm like, yeah, that sounds really great. But last but not least, it's about digitalization. And I think this needs to be accepted. Tax sovereignty, of course, whether we will be managing to reach that while being already this dependent. Well, the question is, will that be software or computing centers, data centers, access to data? But this area, this is the area where at the moment, just because of the fact that digital is not part of it, I'm interpreting this, I'm putting it into in my interpretation. And then I'm just thinking, well, we need to move forward in this area. And we do need sovereignty, of course. But whether we will reach it is another question. If Google thinks nowadays about closing down, shutting down its services in Europe, then we will have black devices, black screens. So the question is, where will this independency actually be situated and how? So I think we should be generous with our definitions here and intentions in order to make sure that we will not be ever more dependent. But this is exactly why I'm in favor of areas in which we should be leading. If we manage to do that, that we are seen as a leader, at least in some areas in digital, well, then I think it's already a success. Mrs. Connemann. On the one side, it is important to formulate an objective, and this is why I'd like also to thank you for your question. At this stage, I actually only wanted to say one sentence, but there is something coming into my mind. I was sitting at dinner with Angela Merkel more than 10 years ago, and she was mentioned. She was asked if she had a wish, what would she wishing for? And she was talking about clouds. She talked about a world in which we were not even able to follow. She talked about heating. She was far ahead of her times, actually. Or at least that was her objective. And this is why I found it so important, what you mentioned now. But this needs to take into account that when we want to move forward, and sovereignty must be an objective, within digital policy, at least in Germany, but I do think also in Europe overall, technological openness needs to be taken into account. And this is actually my message. Thank you very much. We also learned how important dinners are. You mentioned the red wine, whether with or without wine. I would like to thank the panel speakers for this interesting discussion. Prior to saying a last word, Mrs. Plöger, thank you also for being part of this discussion. I would like to thank our interpreters. And now I hand over to you for our final words. Well, I do not want to add too much, but I would like to take up what you said. If Europe. And I hope that the Commission will also formulate this objective, digital sovereignty, and formulate it in such a way that it is a vision to be implemented. If we want to move forward in that area, we will only be able to do that through cooperation. And I think this is the main message. It's not about what can I do in order to make sure that we think positive, but also what can we do to cooperate in this way. And this is important. Within this Commission, we need to have objectives and visions and implement them together, step by step. And in that way, we will be able to create a competitive, sustainable Europe for the future. And now, thank you very much for being here to discuss with us today. We're also looking forward to our next Digital Leaders Roundtable. We do not have set a date yet, but we will certainly share it with you as soon as we have it. And I thank you very much and wish you a nice evening.
Vielen Dank auch an Sie für die ganz und sehr angenehme Moderation.